Well, good evening, everyone. I've been thinking about something that would be a good topic for young people trying to get into regenerative ranching, as well as middle-aged people and even older people that are nearing retirement or in retirement. And that topic is, how do I get property to run cattle on and start to do the regenerative ranching practices that this channel is about. But I can only talk from my own personal experience, so I just wanted to spend a few minutes doing that. We moved to Texas from southern Arizona back in 1989, and there was a long circuitous route to get here: vet school at Colorado State University, internship at Texas A&M University for a year, surgery residency in equine surgery at University of California at Davis. Long story short, we finally arrived at Texas, back to where we had done our internship, and I was a professor at the veterinary school at Texas A&M for 19 years. And in the process, we raised a family. We had 6 kids, and I loved ranching from my growing up years in southern Arizona. And again, I've mentioned before, I grew up on a 400 head cow-calf operation, and that was in my blood. And when I was a junior in high school, my dad asked me, he said, "Hey, what are you going to do with your life?" And I'd never really given it any thought. And I said, "Dad, I'm planning on staying on the ranch with you." And he paused and he thought for a minute, and he said, "You probably need to figure out something else you can do." He said, "This ranch isn't big enough to support 2 families. And you go off, you figure out an occupation, something you can do to support yourself. And if you get through school and into that occupation and this ranch is still here, then let's talk." And that was really good advice for me, something that I needed to hear. I just assumed I was just going to be on the ranch, but that wasn't meant to be. So I got out of veterinary school. I had a relatively good job, but we had a lot of kids and we had a lot of expenses, and we were just starting out with our life. And the decision we had to make early on was, do we want to live in a relatively nice house in town? Nothing big, nothing fancy, but just a relatively nice, comfortable house in suburbia? Or did we want to live out on the land? And thankfully I married the daughter of a rancher, who her dad was also a veterinarian, so she got both sides of the equation as far as what to expect with work and life and all the parameters around my career. And we both made the unanimous decision together, hey, we want to live out on the land. So we searched and searched for property. Everything was way outside our budget, but we finally located this property, the adjacent property next door, and bought 35 acres of land that was 100% trees. And it wasn't just trees, it was brush. It was yaupon, which is a very invasive brush. And that 35 acres of land was absolutely useless as far as a ranching operation, but by golly, it was ours, and it was our start. And we lived in a 720 square foot house with 2 kids. That became 3, that became 4. And we made do, and we sacrificed because we wanted to live out in the country. And so my ranching endeavor started that year. I did some work for a neighbor's friend that had some cattle, and I worked his cows for him. And he asked at the end of the time when we worked the cows, he said, "Hey, so what do I owe you?" And I thought about it for a minute, and I said, "Would you be interested in trading me a heifer for the work that I did?" And he said, "I think that'd be fair." So he gave me a heifer calf that was weaned, and I brought her home. Didn't have any grass on my place other than a little garden plot, and we kept that heifer there, and I talked to a neighbor that did have some grass next door, and he had a few head of cattle, and I grew that calf up, bred her, and that started my small little nugget of foundation to get my foot wet in the agriculture area. Now at that time I knew nothing about regenerative agriculture. We grazed the land into the dirt, and we didn't know how to rotate pastures. We didn't rotate pastures, and the continuous grazing just kept the land poor. But the thing that I want to encourage you all with is you can't go buy property to start these operations. You can buy a little bit of property, and unless you inherit it or you have inherited wealth, if you have to work like I did, you have to start small, you have to watch your money, you have to manage your money, and you have to figure out another option, and that option is to lease property. You don't own it, you control it so that you can graze your cattle. And so you think about it, well, how do I lease property? Do I put an ad on Craigslist? Do I put an ad in the newspaper? What do you do? Where do you get started? And I'm going to tell you the place to start is to start talking to your network of friends, your neighbors, your coworkers. And if you start asking around and start just planting seeds, you'll start to find property that either people own and they don't have any cattle on, or people want ag exemption, so they don't have as high taxes on the property, and they're willing to let you graze your cattle on their property. And so in my particular instance, I had a coworker that had a little 20-acre pasture that he said, you know what, I don't do anything with it, and I'd be tickled to death if you wanted to use it. And he would get the ag exemption. So I had my little small herd of cattle. I think I had 5 head at the time, and we hauled those cows over to that place. And again, we were saving heifers as we went, trying to sell the cull heifers. We'd sell the bull calves, and we were using the money from the sale of the calves that we didn't keep to try to help run the operation. And granted, I had to put money into the operation out of pocket, but I never went in debt to try to make this big monstrosity enterprise go too quick. We took it slow, and one lease place turned into another lease place, a friend of a friend, and I went from a 20-acre pasture to a 100-acre pasture of another co-worker, and we gradually increased the size of our cow herd. We paid our expenses as we went, and that led to another place that a horse operation had extra property on their operation. It was a breeding facility, and they let me use another 90 acres for free. They just wanted somebody to use the grass and keep the place up. And so that place turned into a farrier's place. They had another 100 acres, and the trade out with that place was that they got a couple heifer calves every year, and they gradually built their small herd, and it all worked out good, because then that place turned into another 400-acre lease place. And the point of it is that you can lease land 100 times cheaper than you can buy it, and you can grow your operation. And I went from that one heifer and kept the heifer calves, raised them up, bred them, had more calves, and that's the hard way, and it's probably not the most expedient way, but for our personal finances it was the only way at the time. And so gradually over the course from 1989 or 90, when I got that first heifer, till 2009, I built that herd up to 150 head of cows. And so I had 7 lease places. Some of them I leased for whatever the going rate was at the time. Some of them I got for free just because people wanted to use the grass. And I've got a lease place right next door to where we're talking right now that I pay $10 a year for a 35-acre piece of property to use it for cattle. And so that's how you get started. And as you build it and you improve it, you want to keep your landowners happy so that they know you're invested in it, and try to do a really good job with their property. People will come to know that, hey, this person handles their property well, they do a good job with it, and one person tells another person, and then sometimes other properties become available. So that would be my recommendation, and then you're able to potentially buy more property. We've been fortunate and we've been able to buy 4 different places that surround us and gradually increase our acreage right here. And that would be the best advice I have. Start small, grow as you're able, pay for things out of pocket, and make sure you don't go in too much debt. You don't need a new tractor. You don't even need an old tractor. I used a tumble bug to put out hay, which is a little rig that you pull behind your truck. All those things are savings in your pocket when you don't have big capital expenses, and you don't need to spend the money on the interest to pay for those capital expenses. So just to finish out the story, in 2009 I built an equine hospital, and I didn't have time to take care of the cattle like I had, and so I sold everything but 12 cows. I took that money from those 150 head of cows, 138 head of cows that I sold. I cleared these places that I'd put together here of the underbrush. I planted grass. I built new fences. I built a set of working pens so I could handle the cattle and work them efficiently. And I've built this herd back now to about 60 head. And I'm keeping all my cattle at home where I can take care of them by myself. And so there's a will, there's a way. You got to have it. You got to have passion in your heart to do this. It's great for the land. My property is transformed by rotational grazing and following the principles that Greg Judy and Joel Salatin and some of the others that are in this business have very articulately put out on their YouTube channels. It's just good stuff, and you can see these cattle are fat, they're healthy, the grass looks great, and we're doing something that I'm proud of. And so I would just encourage those of you that want to be in the cattle business and be regenerative ranchers of sorts and improve the land and do what we need to be doing with the land. This is the way to do it. You start slow, start small, pay your way as you go, make smart financial decisions, because you're not going to get rich in the cattle business unless you do some really good marketing and you get into the grass-fed beef end of things and have good quality cattle to sell. But it's a nice way of life if you want to be small and raise a couple of grass-fed steers a year for your family and friends. There's lots of opportunity out there. And so if you are interested in regenerative agriculture, this is where it's at. And I would tell you, if you got it in your heart to do it, enjoy it, and it's a wonderful way of life.